I'm 33 years old. My name's Sunny, obviously. I'm from Long Beach, California, but I live in Las Vegas. And currently I run a cancer awareness e-commerce clothing brand that I started during my bout with cancer. Right before cancer, it was probably the best point I had been in. I think 20 days before I was diagnosed, I had just bought my first house in Las Vegas. I was a digital media buyer for a fitness company called D-Shred. And everything, I was in the best shape of my life, and just getting sick and needing to a hospital visit is what started everything in terms of diagnosis. The moment that they told me, it was my mom was in the room, and it's pretty similar to how they portray it in movies where everything just kind of goes silent. You kind of feel like you're in an out of body experience. You don't really, you don't know how to take it's such shock that you can't really comprehend it all in one moment. Obviously, with family around, it's even more intense. And it was how do I explain it? It was all happening so fast that there wasn't a ton of time to like really process it until you're like deeper into treatments. And when I was officially diagnosed, my mom asked if there was time for a second opinion to make sure that, it's not just error. And they said that there was no time, that I was already 80% of my blood was already cancerous, and I needed to start chemo the next day. So I was basically scheduled to put a chest board in that evening, and I started treatment immediately after that. Ended up being acute myeloid leukemia, which is an aggressive form of leukemia. And once it became official, it was it was harder to remain as optimistic. Obviously, they're still trying to stay positive and all these things, but it was dark for everybody. So we would spend a lot of time in the hospital room, just kind of sitting in silence and processing this new information. It was obviously a very dire situation. So the initial induction treatment that I received in Vegas was 7+3, which is a common treatment. I actually put it up because I never remember all the names. But 7+3 is basically idarubicin, which is also known as like the Red Devil. It's a very high dose chemotherapy. It was that mixed with cytarabine, and that was the first 2 weeks. And so going through that treatment, I would say that the first real big symptom was the extreme amount of fatigue. The first day after getting the treatments, I remember barely being able to lift my head up, not really being able to eat my food, not really functioning at all. To get an idea of how, for viewers, I guess, for how dangerous this type of substance is with the idarubicin, it's if you use the restroom and you've been given this medication or this chemo, you have to flush twice, because if your caretaker goes in after you, the chemicals from that can harm them. And this is what's getting ran through your chest port and throughout your body. I would say symptoms ranged from, like I said, extreme fatigue to extreme nausea, just basically nonstop pain. I had extreme headaches, which they said was pretty normal, because your bones, you can feel the pain throughout all of your bones. And one of the unfortunate parts, at least I can't speak to all cancers, but with what my treatment was that you can't give a ton of pain medication because it could mask something that's going on. And so you're limited with what you're allowed to take. Not to mention, obviously, they want to remove any likelihood of you trying to take drugs, just for not recreational, but for your enjoyment, I guess. So they severely limit you, and they always start you each day from like the bottom dose of like something like lorazepam, or something just really low dose, and then you have to throughout the day work your way up to more intense medications. So that was rough too, just because you're in a lot of pain and there's not a lot you can do about it. Some of the most challenging for the type of treatment I have is that there's it's extremely common to end up with infections because of how low your immune system is in between cycles of chemotherapy. And so when I would get a cycle of chemo and then you're supposed to go home for 2 weeks, I would most times I'd end up back in the hospital with some sort of infection. I ended up getting sepsis at one point. Uh, I was, shaking uncontrollably. My mom's trying to hold my legs down. Like, I would say that was probably one of the darker moments, especially knowing that if you go into septic shock, like what it could all mean. I think that was a pretty low moment. The idea that during this period of time, my grandma she passed away while I was getting treatments. She was in California. My dad during this time was going over there to deal with the funeral and all of this. And during that time, I was fighting an infection, and that's a low point. You can't be there for them. You can hardly function on your own. I knew the stress it was taking on my mom being alone with me during this time. I think that was probably one of the lowest moments. Initially, I was very angry. I felt like I got screwed in terms of how life was working out for me. Things were finally reaching a point where I felt like success was around the corner. I was, gaining financial independence, all these things that I had seen as the most important thing in my life leading up to that point. So of course, initially you're angry, you're depressed, but I think what ends up happening, which for me, I think it was, I want to say probably within the first 2 rounds of consolidation chemo in Houston, I had kind of, I would say, like a mental break where it was like you have like two paths that you can choose, where you're just like this victim forever and you're angry at the world and you're bitter and hard to be around, and nobody's going to fault you for it because you're going through such a terrible thing. Or you can become the support system for everybody around you. You can see the lighter side of things. You've been given a new perspective on life that very few people will ever have, and luckily so in some circumstances. But basically, I think I ended up choosing more of a path of I would say I had a lot of mentorship through people that I would listen to. I had a great support system through my parents being there for me and family members. And I thought that the best thing I could do with these limited circumstances is show up for them and make it, handle it with enough grace that it makes it easier on them. Because as hard as treatments are for everything that I went through, mainly the entire time I'm feeling terrible for the fact that my parents are having to go through this, and the family, and how much it impacts everybody's lives around me. And so my number one goal was to try to handle things with as much like just calmness. I was extremely calm after that. I was very like I said, it's a new perspective on life. So you kind of realize what's more important. I was everything before cancer was so go and check these boxes and make sure you do all these things right, and money's so important, and you got to have a house, and then you got to have a business and all these things. And I think through this process, I learned what's more important, and it gave me time to take a step back and kind of realize these things. And I think the more that I could look at things from that perspective and not be a victim in the situation, kind of is what allowed for, things like the creativity to start flowing, for me to come up with infinite motive, and for me to start thinking about how I could give back in the situation. And I knew I needed to create something that even if I wasn't going to survive it, that I could have it carry on to help others down the road. And that's kind of what the mentality shift became. 6 months after, and they considered me cancer free at the time. And so we kind of went back to California with family, had somewhat of a celebratory time, but the entire time I'm thinking in my head that I don't really feel like it's finished, and it felt kind of like fake to celebrate this time. And then sure enough, I ended up getting sick. I think while I was still in California, I started getting sick. We went back to Houston, got another bone marrow biopsy and testing done, and sure enough, the cancer was back. And so the only option at that point would be bone marrow transplant. And luckily, before that, because we knew that might be a possibility, we had already looked into matching donors, and I was fortunate enough to have my sister as 100% match. So of course, already the convenience of them being there, them being doctors, and then of course she was a match, so it was all in one place. So for a bad situation, I was extremely lucky with how things were working out. But so yeah, then we had to start doing conditioning to prepare for bone marrow transplant, which that's even more high dose chemotherapy. That was with let's see, fludarabine and methylene 140. And then post transplant was a dose of cyclophosphamide. And so all of this, of course, is to put you at zero counts for day zero to introduce the stem cells for my sister for transplant. So that was, and then after transplant, I would do a year of maintenance chemotherapy as well, which was less intensive. It was azacitidine, and that was, I think, 3 times a week for a year, or 3 times a week for a month for a whole year. That's what it was. I think that everybody going through this type of situation, you end up having to confront death, because it's, I mean, or mortality at least. It's you have to, because it's a very real possibility. When you're told that you have like a 60% chance, it's like, those are big enough odds that death is a real possibility. And so I think you go through a phase of kind of understanding what that means and what that looks like. And the entire time, as much as I confronted it and knew that it was a very real possibility, I just always felt like there was no way that was it. I felt like there's too much that I had planned to do with my life, and it was almost like just go step by step, follow through with what you have to do, and get through it, and then you'll come out the other side with whatever, it's not going to be the life you had before. It never will be, but it'll be a life. And I knew that as long as I just kept that mentality and kept moving forward, and and not making huge emotional reactions either way. Like, good numbers are good, but I'm not going to celebrate a crazy amount, and bad numbers are bad, but I'm not going to think that this is the end. And so you just kind of stay in this middle path of just balance, really. And I think that that's what my mentality was for most of the process. It was just, it was a job. It was showing up every day for a job that, that had a lot of bad side effects. What happens through survivorship is that everybody sees that you're back to normal, at least on the outside. So everybody kind of just returns to the normal day to day. There's no more concern about my situation. It's, oh, you're good now. That's fine. Everything's good. But the person that went through it, you're stuck with this for life. It's always inside of you. So you kind of start to feel like a ghost amongst normal people, because they can't grasp it. You don't want to make every conversation about it. And so you're torn. You're like, you kind of have to do these battles on your own. I'm fortunate enough that, like I said, my mom was my caretaker. So at the very least, at all times, there's the connection that she went through all of it with me. She knows it. She, to an extent, goes through the same thing, because she knows that it's never going to be normal again. And she saw it all happen, but everybody kind of just goes back to normal. So you are faced with that and the social challenges of that. And again, it puts the onus on you on reframing how you look at things and knowing that this perspective could be a superpower because you understand trauma and mortality and health importance at a level that most people don't ever, or they won't until they're way older. During treatment, we came up with this idea of infinite motive. It was an idea I had a long time ago for like a clothing business, but I never obviously anticipated it becoming about cancer. But it came about because at all the cancer centers that we were at, all the clothing for cancer patients always looks pretty much the same. There's like a ribbon, says something about cancer. It says the cancer center's name. There's no style. There's no fashion sense to it. And while I kind of understand why, at the same time, I know that during a time of going through something like this, there's nothing better than like having some sense of normalcy from the life that you had. So whether it's purchasing clothes or purchasing, anything that gives you that feeling of the life that you came from. And so I had this idea that if I could start making stylish, approachable cancer clothing that isn't just a ribbon and cancer in big letters, but more stylish and make people more comfortable in terms of supporting the cause. Because I know that if I was like a friend of somebody that had cancer, I might not feel comfortable wearing, I'll feel imposter syndrome from wearing something in support of them that says cancer, rather than if it's something like, a small logo that represents that and that that's what it means, then it's similar to like how Live Strong was. And if you remember with the yellow wristbands when everybody was wearing that a long time ago, and everybody felt comfortable doing it because it was all under one umbrella of cancer support. And so through that, I had this idea. My background before that was graphic design. So I knew that I could, it would be a creative outlet for me. And I could, the business model is that 10% of proceeds go towards the cancer foundation of their choice. And it's corresponding to the purchase. So I have designs that go through all the different cancer colors, and then the one they select is where the proceeds will go. Initially, this will just be obviously to the foundations, but the long-term goal is to raise enough money in these different types of cancers that I could actually, bring it together and impact the life of like one family and give them a lump sum that'll completely change their lives. And I know it'll be a huge impact because the people that do the smallest helpful things when I was going through treatment, whether they were helping my mom find something while she was walking the halls, or whether we were lost because MD Anderson's a huge cancer center and telling us where to go. And these small little things that people do to help mean the world to you when everything seems like it's crashing around you. And so if we can offer that through the form of, blankets, shirts, beanies, things that are going to just give comfort and make them feel not so lost and alone in the world, then that's one component of it. And the other is I've already filmed a series of my cancer journey that led to Infinite Motive, but I'm also going to be starting a How to Cope with Cancer YouTube series. And so the more that I can provide that kind of value, when I know that when I was going through it, if I found somebody that was doing what I plan on doing, it would mean the world to me, because that's when you feel the most alone. That's when you feel like lost, and you have no sense of your previous life. You're just in this silo of chaos, basically. And so through Infinite Motive, I plan on that being those different ways of making the biggest impact I can in people's lives.
I was down, but now I'm up. Yeah. It's all God.